Ready to unwrap a surprise from Consumer Cellular? Experience the gift of freedom with no contract, no hidden fees, and always free activation. Here comes the holiday surprise. From now till December 31st, new customers can enjoy their second month for free. To get this holiday offer, visit consumercellular.com or call 1-888-FREEDOM and use promo code PODCAST. Act before December 31st to get your second month on us. Use promo code PODCAST.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. On today's show, we'll be diving into the world of family constellations, and we'll be featuring our guest, Dan Cohen, who's a PhD and an internationally known psychologist, trainer, author, and facilitator of Family and Systemic Constellations. He also specializes in healing the effects of inherited trauma and helping clients fulfill their desires for having more love and deeper impact in their lives. He uses his knowledge of world history, mythology, and culture with his intuitive abilities, and he creates profound and transformative healing experiences that expand understanding and restore peace of mind. I'm super excited to welcome Dan Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Yasmin. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So I have asked many members of the audience what topics they're interested in learning about, and family constellations has come up quite a bit. And, I also, in full disclosure, don't know much about family constellations other than the little bits and pieces I've read. So I'm super excited to learn from you what this process is like, what does it mean, how does it transform lives? So maybe you could just kick it off for folks who also might be beginners to family constellations. What is family constellation therapy?
Sure, that's a great place to start. Family constellations are a experiential process that allow people to start with a situation that they have in their life that feels problematic or burdensome to them, or a way that they're being held back, and look and see how it is part of a larger tapestry of emotion and behavior and relationships that has come to them through their family lineage. And in the context of their everyday, it seems insolvable and very difficult to make progress with. But when you open up the awareness and bring in the generations, you can actually access support and relief and blessings from past generations in a way that allow the weight of the problem to lift, and for people to be able to step forward with more freedom into their intentions and desires for their lives.
Beautiful. So what you're saying is, people who have maybe some emotional experiences or emotional ailments, it's connected to kind of a larger sequence of generations. And so my question is, how can you tell if something is inherited or if something is created within one's own life? Like maybe we could take, for example, something like, hunger or having a desire to eat too much, for example. And feel free to pick another example if there's others that are more popular. But I'm just curious, like, how can you tell which is which?
Well, there are a few markers that can tell the difference between what I call a family entanglement and a something that is within one's own life experience. One of the markers is that the ordinary techniques and therapies and tools that are readily available seem to be very ineffective. And there are certainly a host of good therapies and other types of cognitive and behavioral tools that work on a whole range of situations that people find themselves in that they want to improve. The ones that are super resistant to those tools, it's usually an indication that there is an entanglement involved. That's one marker. Another marker is that people recognize within themselves that the feeling that they have doesn't feel like them. So a situation of someone feeling an anger or rage coming over them, and they're expressing that rage, but inside of them, there's a recognition that this doesn't feel like me. Or it might be someone who has a sense of abandonment and rejection from their family, but they're actually living in a very loving and well-connected family, that their sisters are there and their parents are very attentive to them, and yet they have this feeling of not belonging. And that would be another indicator that there's a kind of a mismatch between the person's lived experience, which in that case would be very connected and loving, and the person's inner feeling, which is to be alone and abandoned. And that would indicate that there is almost someone within them who feels alone and abandoned that comes through the lineage. They're feeling someone else's emotion. And this would be the indicator to go trace and find out who that was and release it.
Wow, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have aspects of themselves that feel like, hey, that's not actually me. It feels like there's some third party or some kind of maybe unconscious aspect of self that's creating emotions or feeling emotions that don't make sense within our life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I come from the Middle East. And I think for a lot of people that come from, or their families come from regions in which there has been war, I imagine that, it probably stays longer than just one generation. So is there, in your work, have you seen, how many generations this applies to?
It can go back many generations. It typically can go back 3, 4, or 5 generations. And it can often go back further in cases where were really severe traumas. And sometimes it also blends into some older memes. So in places where there had been kind of mass movements or expulsions of people or massacres of different types, that those can really be carried over for many, many generations. In Kosovo, Serbia, that area, there was a war there from 800 years ago that remained very active, and people really felt in their bodies the sense of displacement even centuries later. It's not unusual.
Wow. Dan, you talk about the 3 essential aspects of our being, which is our creative sexual energy, our heart's perception of the consciousness that surrounds us, and our crown chakra that connects the light of our soul to the light of the universe. Why is this so important? It's on your website. I know it's some of the kind of aspects that you've been cultivating in your work. And so can you tell us a little bit about these 3 essential aspects, what they mean?
Yes, the reason I'm focusing on those is because in the modern technological scientific worldview that most of the world is living in, there is a underlay of the indigenous, traditional cultures, and then built on top of that is the modern scientific world, and different places in the world there are different relationships. The Middle East has a much stronger underlay of the traditional cultures, whereas in Europe, those older cultures have almost disappeared completely, and the modern scientific culture has taken over. And in the modern culture, these aspects of our body, our creative sexual energy, our heart perception of the consciousness that surrounds us, and our crown chakra they've practically been amputated. They've been so suppressed by this dominant culture. So sexuality is shamed and oppressed, and sexual pleasure is denied and treated as something dark or evil. That the ability within our hearts that we have for communication, to be able to communicate across distances, to be able to be in connection with the lineage that we have through the back doors of our heart and the front doors of our heart, to be able to connect, that's really been truncated. And also that a lot of our mind has just been translated down into our brains, as if everything that is a part of our awareness or identity is just produced by the neural activity of our brains. And so that is also a type of cutting off. So a lot of my work is opening up these body centers to awareness, to allow people to reconnect to the body that evolution has taken billions of years to create for us, that has all of these capabilities that a lot of people don't fully use.
Can you tell our audience what the crown chakra is for those who might not know what that means? Because I know that was one of the third aspects.
The crown chakra, it's shorthand for just our body's capacity at the top of our head to be able to interact with spirit. So it is it's in yoga culture, in Middle Eastern culture. It is typically considered the place where spirit energy comes in, where prayers kind of leave the body and go up, and where spirit energy comes in. And it's just an energetic center of the body. And the chakra is just a common term that not everybody's familiar with for that part of our body. So I'm really interested in the top of our head, our heart, the bottom of our feet, which is where energetically we connect to the earth, and then also where the sexual life force is, and where the reproductive and the creative energy force is in our bodies, and just being able to allow people to really be able to use the beauty of our human body for all its capabilities.
And Dan, you talked about this in just the earlier point, and I want to go back to it really quick, which is this kind of balancing nature between tradition and, I would say, modernism. How do you balance that in your work? Like, I think so much of Western culture, like you mentioned, is largely focused in the head. And then some traditional cultures are focused in the heart and in the spirit. But I find that it's been very difficult to create a bridge. And so I'm just, curious if you could maybe share an example or two of some of the work that you do with family constellations to show us like how you bring that into balance for people and maybe what comes up.
Generally, the distinction that I make is that in indigenous cultures, which I think of intact cultures that have very deep connections, century-long connections with land and with culture, that all of these teachings they're in the water that people drink and the air that they breathe. It's not family constellations would not really be necessary in an intact indigenous culture. But more and more people are not living in those cultures anymore. There's been a lot of displacement, a lot of modernism, and the technology and the capabilities that they bring are wonderful. We have grocery stores rather than having to farm our own food, and we can travel all over the world. It's really marvelous to have this technology, and at the same time, it cuts us off from these traditions. And for many of us, we can't really just go back to the traditions that we came from, because either they don't exist, or there's a lot of intermarriage going on, or interculture. We're living in neighborhoods where there's an Indian place, a Chinese place, a Thai restaurant, a Middle Eastern restaurant, all on the same block. And we're going to school and work with people from all around the world. And so there's an evolutionary movement to be able to bring some of the wisdom of the ancient sciences together with the capabilities of the modern technological, and create an evolutionary movement. So it's neither going back to the old ways, nor is it being stuck in the kind of dry and sterile scientific worldview, but creating a new worldview, a new way to stand that is, for me, it's more mystical, it's more magical, and it draws on both of those streams to create something new.
Mm. And Dan, can you tell us like what the actual process is like for family constellations? Like, can you maybe break it down? Like, a person comes in to work with you, they've got some issue, or is that something that also you kind of unravel? What does that whole process look like? Can you walk us through that?
Sure thing. So I've been working with the process for 20 years. And so I do it in a particular way that's somewhat unique to me. It's still family constellations, and I work with a lot of my colleagues and we do trainings. But if you go to a practitioner, you may see it done a little bit differently than the way I'm doing it. But I'll describe my practice. doing a lot of my work with individuals, and especially now with the pandemic that we can't do live groups. So my partner and I, who's also a facilitator, we're doing one-to-one sessions, and we're doing them mostly on Zoom. I start with a person's intention or their desire. I don't start with the problem. I start with what do you want for your life? What is it that feels unfulfilled, or something that you're trying to manifest or create in your life? And does it feel blocked, or do you feel a burden? And you have difficulty kind of stepping forward. So my job is to be able to fulfill their intention or to fulfill their desire. In doing so, I solve the problem, but it's not the entree point. Is what's your problem? How can I fix it? It's what do you want for yourself? What do you want for your life? And how can we create that for you? And then we look at what's in the way. So we start with the conversation, and then the kind of the special feature of constellations that you wouldn't find in typical therapy is that it's not talk therapy. We're not working so much with the narratives or the conversation that a person has of description of their problem. I don't need much of a description, a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes to understand what the desire is and what the problem is. And at that point, I tune in, which is just for a minute or two, I just close my eyes and images come into my awareness. And the person I'm working with does the same, and they will receive some images. We share those. And then I stand up and I do what's called represent. I use representative perception. And in groups, you have people in a group that would represent, but one-on-one, I'm doing the representations, and the person I'm working with also will represent. And I'll start by feeling the intention, the desire. I'll feel what that's like. And then I'll feel the burden or the block. And because I do this every day, I've been doing it for years and years, I'm very good at it. But everybody can do this. You can actually feel in your body. You can access the consciousness of someone else's field of consciousness. You can feel their ancestors. You can feel the world that they're living in. This is just something that evolution has given to the body that hasn't been terribly well encouraged, but everybody can do this to one extent or another, like music. And so I feel in, and I get a sense of what the problem feels like. And then I start to trace the lineage. So I'll stand as a problem. I'll take a step back, and I'll feel the father in relation to that problem and the mother, and which one has the more energy. And then say it's the mother. I'll step back and I'll feel grandmother and grandfather, which one has the most energy. And as I go back, I start to actually feel which ancestor and what was the situation that occurred that is creating this emotion of the block or burden. And we go back and we find the ancestor that it is associated with. I work back and forth with the person so that everything is being kind of tested, and I'm getting validation from them that it's in tune, that I'm not just giving them a reading, but we're really doing this, we're co-creating the process, and find the ancestor. And then I can actually access the consciousness of the ancestor, and I do a healing between the ancestor and their living child. And we can actually heal both generations. And when we do that healing, the burden lifts, it evaporates, and the ancestor feels healed and connected. And the child, the living person, and an adult, but a child of the ancestor, feels this release, a big exhale, a weight lifted off their shoulder, and the problem has, in a sense, evaporated, and they're free to step towards their intention. And that's what they do.
Wow. Dan, so in some of these cases, what are some stories or themes that have come up in this process? I imagine that there's probably recurring themes that you've seen over a 20-year span. And I'm curious if you could share with us maybe one or two or stories of people that might have healed not only emotional, but maybe even a physical ailment. I imagine that there could be both.
So a woman that I worked with recently contacted me. She's about to become a grandmother for the first time. She has 2 children, and her son's partner is pregnant and was going to be giving birth in the next few weeks. And they fell into this terrible estrangement where the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law fell into this terrible conflict, and the daughter-in-law was kind of cutting off the relationship. The son was taking his wife's side and was telling his mother not to come, that his wife doesn't trust her and doesn't want her around the baby, and that they're going to just have the baby on their own, and they don't want her to come and visit or even to see the baby. And of course, this woman was distraught because this was going to be her first grandchild, and she was really almost desperate to be able to solve this problem. And they, of course, argued about it. And every time they argue and discuss and fight, it seems like it gets worse. So we do the constellation. I'm only working with the grandmother-to-be. I'm not communicating in any way with the children, and they don't even need to know that this process has happened. And we do what I just described. We feel, where is the conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, where the son was caught in the middle, and there was an estrangement, and the family was cut off from the father's family, the new family. And so we do the process, and we find the entanglement, heal the entanglement. And I spoke to her a few weeks later, I think 3 or 4 weeks later. She called back, and she said that they've prepared the in-law apartment for her. They're so excited that she's coming. And they can't wait. She was actually flying out the next day. She was at a distance from where they were, and she wanted to speak to me before she got on the plane. And they were the young couple was so excited that grandma was going to be there for the birth.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. That's my day job. I mean, I don't know if you want another one, or that's.
Yeah, I love hearing these stories. Yeah, if you can share another one.
I worked recently with a woman that has a thyroid issue, where her thyroid levels are hers are very low, and her father also has a thyroid issue, very high, and he's taking medication. She's trying to get her levels back without having to take the medication. I do work with thyroid quite a bit. Thyroid it's kind of a sponge that holds emotion. And so you can, and it gets overwhelmed. It is a type of filter sponge. When there's excess emotion in the body, the thyroid absorbs it and can end up being overwhelmed by it. So similar, we do the constellation. We're tuning in and putting in the representatives. The thing that I felt was tears, just a lot of grief and sadness, this deep grief and sadness that was being absorbed, and an inability to grieve. And we traced back, and we found an ancestor in the father's lineage that had a very tragic life, and the process of kind of digesting that emotion had never been completed, and it kind of cascaded on to the next generations and the next generations. And so we, again, we're able to release the entanglement and the levels. The next time that this person had a blood test, their levels were normal.
Wow, that is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I can listen to these stories all day. I mean, it's like the chicken soup for the soul of family constellations and healing.
Right. It's quite remarkable. It's kind of challenging for me that it's not more readily available. And, I understand in a sense, here, take this pill every day for the rest of your life has a lot of appeal to it in the marketplace, compared to here, spend 2 hours looking at what the source is and heal it, and then you don't have to come back. So sometimes it's a little bit frustrating for me that this work has not really caught on or gotten the traction that it deserves. And of course, there's also, we're in a big sea of a lot of false promises and over promises for different things, and it's very hard for people to cut through the noise. You can just flip through a magazine and you can find 25 remedies for your thyroid, and if you tried all of them, you'd just be out a lot of money, and you'd probably still have thyroid issues. And I don't know how anybody would tell that constellations are any different than the other ones in the background. I mean, I know, but I can understand that it's challenging for people to to be able to on these different levels to be able to embrace the potential of this. But I do this day in and day out, and it's practically one miracle after another.
Wow. It's interesting. I mean, I think for most people, and especially in the Western culture, we don't spend any time thinking about our ancestors. I mean, just based on my own experience of growing up in the US, I think a lot of my friends would speak about their grandparents, but when it got to their great grandparents or their great great grandparents, I think very few people even know like who they were, what their names were, anything really about them. And I kind of speak on behalf of myself as well. If I go back after my great grandmother, I don't actually know what the story is. So it's very interesting that even just like acknowledging this long line of ancestors changes, I think, the way you perceive yourself in the world. So it's fascinating.
Right. I mean, we're in a kind of a world of disconnection, and so to be connected is empowering, and it's possible to the information is in people's heart, and it is surrounding them. So it's possible to tune in and represent for oneself and or do different types of practices or rituals that you can really learn about your ancestors. You can search on ancestry.com or whatever on a computer, but that's one type of information that comes in. But you can also access the information through your own representation and really feel and create relationships with these ancestors, people in your lineage that all the struggles of their lives contributed to your good life, and that there's still love there that is a resource for people to feel a continuing and a continuous source of love for their life.
Dan, you talk about some of the benefits with this work on your site, things like understanding historic and mythic fractals, which I want to actually ask you what that is, mythic fractals. I haven't heard those two words put together. And then coming to terms with your shadow perpetrator and aligning with your heart's desire and soul's purpose. Can you speak to us about what those benefits mean, kind of maybe more in layman's terms?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I really love to go there. So one can think of a woman, and it's interesting, Yasmin, because you have this podcast, and so you're using your voice as part of your work. But for a lot of women, they really feel a block in their throat when they want to express themselves in a public forum. And not necessarily to their sisters or within their family. They feel more free to speak, but to do this kind of podcast and speak to a large audience or speak in front of a business meeting, they have ideas and things that they want to say, and they feel blocked. They feel this just force of oppression within them that they shouldn't speak. And you can trace that culturally. And of course, perhaps in the family that they came from, the women were more silent, and you can see it just within the family system. But if you start tracing it back into the larger cultural field, you can find that this is has been a principle that has been enforced for many, many centuries within the culture, that women are not to use their voice, that women are to be seen and seen as beautiful, but they are not to speak in the public square. They're not to express themselves in a man's world. And so as you trace this back, you'll find a source of this as well. And it may be centuries old. We find in European culture, if you go back 400 years, you come to the time of the witch hunts and the witch burning, which is a time when indigenous women were hunted down and murdered by the tens of thousands all throughout Europe. And these were women that held the wisdom of plant medicine. They were the healers. They were the leaders in their community. And in the cultural shifts of the creation of the nation states of Europe, they were really persecuted. And so even though that's 4 centuries ago, a lot of women today still feel the stigma that they'll be branded crazy, they'll be ostracized or kicked out or persecuted if they start to feel some of this women's healing capacity within themselves, or to start to speak their mind. And so that's kind of a historical fractal, but you can just continue going back and find a deeper source in myth. And we go back to, you can go back to the myth of Isis and Osiris in the Egyptian myths. You can go into the Sumerian myths and you find these women goddesses, Inanna, who's a Sumerian goddess. And the stories are the same of how the women's voices at the cultural shift from the earth goddesses to the sun god, that women's voices were cut off and their power was robbed from them. And so even in these mythic stories, there is a way that those figures are still present within the modern world and modern women. If you find them, people are not aware of it ordinarily, but if you trace the first feeling that you have, a woman in a staff meeting who has an idea, but she's afraid to say anything, and you trace it back, you can go all the way back to the beginning of history with it and find a source for it. That's the historic and mythic fractals. Should I go on to the shadow perpetrator?
Yes, please. Yeah. Very interesting.
I'm trying to be concise, but it's a little, I get, kind of pulled into this. The shadow perpetrator is basically that it's how much easier it is to see other people's faults than to be aware of how we are contributing to our own problems. So you can see in it, like in a marriage, it's very clear that if you talk to a partner in a marriage, and particularly usually the wife, because generally the wives are more aware of what's going on in a marriage, and the men are a little bit more oblivious and they don't really get what's going on so much as a stereotype, that the women will be very aware. If you ask a woman about her marriage, she'll start telling you what's wrong with her husband. And she'll be less aware of the shadow of her own way of contributing to having a husband who disappoints her in a certain way. And she might be able to find that, my mother was disappointed in my father in the same way. My grandmother was disappointed in my grandfather in the same way. And there kind of creates a sense that we pick bad men, or like all men are bad, or I just hate men, or whatever it is, that there's a flaw in men. But that when we say shadow, it's the part that's not seen, is that women are also contributing. The men contribute 100% and the women contribute 100% within a marriage. So the shadow perpetrator is just a phrase that describes how a person in a relationship is contributing to the thing that they don't like about that relationship as much as the other person is. And because it's in the shadow, it's not seen. And our process is to bring it out into the light so people can really recognize how they're contributing to what they don't like in the relationship as much as their partner and their partner's flaws.
I'm hanging on to your every word, so I'm excited to hear about what's next with the heart's desire and soul's purpose. I have, I've actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about the shadow and our unconscious side, and we've actually had a couple guests speak about this, and especially in terms of relationship, like that. Sometimes the partner that we pick expresses like the unconscious, masculine or feminine shadow that we actually don't own ourselves. So yeah, I'm fascinated by this. But yeah, I'm excited to hear what's next about the heart's desire.
So in the heart's desire and the soul purpose is, there's one sense that our body and our souls are often in conflict with each other. Very often people are When I say soul, I think of soul as the core identity that exists with or without a body. Not everybody has the same outlook. People can hold it in all different ways, and it all works. That's the way that I'm holding it, based on my experience of what I've seen. But it's not. I don't want to get too narrow in what that necessarily means. But the soul, in a sense, is a core identity that comes into life with a purpose. So people are born. You could think of it as karma in one sense. Soul is another way of putting it. There's other words for it as well. But we come into life with a certain purpose of what we're here for. What is our life going to be about? What kind of impact are we meant to have? What are we trying to do or work through in our lifetime? And many people are born into families that conflict with that purpose, as actually as a way of creating the friction and the kind of the contraction that creates the ground for that purpose to be fulfilled. But whereas the heart is created by the body. So within the heart's desire is the inheritance, because the heart we get our heart from our mother and from our father. And so the inheritance of the lineage comes to our heart, and our heart desires usually something that is in relationship to healing what's in the family system. So we have what comes through our family that we're trying to heal, and we have what comes from our soul that is a purpose, what we're trying to accomplish. And very often those are in conflict with each other. So when I speak about aligning your heart's desire and your soul's purpose, is to be able to look at ways to harmonize those. It really means a lot of times working through the blocks and entanglements in the lineage, and then allow the heart's desire to really not be sourced by trying to heal the past, but connect to the soul and the soul's purpose and come into alignment. And that actually creates a really powerful ground for a person to be able to step forward and to be able to accomplish what they're here to do.
Wow. And this is some of the work that you do in your workshops, or is this done one-on-one, or is it kind of both?
This is the bigger work in the classes and the programs that we're running. So the individual work is more kind of problem solving and direct healing, like the thyroid type of thing, or a situation that I described. But these bigger themes about desire and purpose, both my partner Emily and I have offerings. Before the pandemic, we did it all together. We did workshops and trainings and immersions. Since the pandemic, we're offering our offerings are individual. So she has offering that she's doing, which she calls Empowered Empath and Sage Soul, which is a program for individuals. It goes over 4 months, and it's a program for individuals to just really get into contact with what's their soul purpose. How can they access the guides and the resources that their soul brings into this life to be able to fulfill, to recognize what are their entanglements and how are they in relationship to their family, to their body. And then she also has a lot of practices that she teaches. So she has full moon ceremonies and new moon ceremonies, and how to work with objects to be able to manifest, and to work with sound and sound healing, to all types of things like that. A lot of practices that people can use with fire, with water, with nature, with plants, all those type of things to be able to support individuals. It's mostly women in her program, not all, but mostly women, to be able to just have more resource in their life for fulfillment. My class is called Science, Myth, Magic, and Mystery. It's a little bit more of a mix of half and half, women and men. And it's more about looking at the collective. And so it's for people who are working professionally in different fields, who want to have a bigger impact in their work. So I have physicians, educators, psychologists. There's an ayahuasca server. There's a shaman, executive coaches, et cetera. A judge is in it.
Wow.
And we're looking at collective issues around racism and class and science, and how the collective forces of culture and society, of faith and belief, are just need an upgrade for the 21st century. That the past centuries gave us a culture, and we need to evolve a new culture. And the core really has to do with consciousness. That human consciousness has so much capability, more capability than our culture allows. So part of the work I'm doing and be able to access ancestral consciousness, to be able to work with the relationships between the living and the dead, to work with telepathy or different types of intuition, that these are built into the human body. The evolution created them, and it's time to bring them into the culture, and to be able to start being able to manifest and educate professionals that the culture has brought us so far, but it's brought us to climate change, to perpetual wars, to the pandemic, this virus which is caused by environmental factors, and all of these things. We need an upgrade to the way that humans are living on the earth, and we need to do it in a short amount of time. And so that's the focus of my class.
Wow, I want to sign up for that. That sounds incredible. And
I'd love to have you.
Yes, these are topics I am very fascinated and interested in. And I'm wondering, Dan, have you seen any major shifts in this work since the pandemic started? Like, how has that maybe influenced the collective mind?
Well, I mean, there's, the pandemic overall has been, a pretty major catastrophe for humanity, economically, health-wise, all the deaths and the displacement. So it has been, a really negative event for humanity. And at the same time, it has had some positive effects. It hasn't been all terrible. And the places where I've seen the benefits is it's gotten people off the hamster wheel. It's gotten them out of commuting back and forth every day and being in an office with people that they can't stand and doing a job that is kind of soul killing to them. And it's allowed people to have more time of quiet time for themselves, to be more introspective, to be able to connect with loved ones and themselves on a different level, and to be able to really ask some questions about what their purpose is. Why are they here? Because the kind of frenzied work people did of just trying to get one step in front of another and try to do better tomorrow and next week and get the next raise and get the next promotion and all that, we've kind of like burned that out. And now people are asking different questions and finding different answers. And the people I'm working with are actually finding some really interesting answers and finding ways to continue their work, to continue to fit into the economy and make a living and continue to earn and support their families, but a little bit outside of the mind numbingness of the pre-pandemic freeway that everybody was stuck in traffic on.
Yes, I have seen that in my own circle, especially in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. I think most people that were on this tech startup hamster wheel have been asking a lot of the hardest questions. So I agree. And Dan, I'd love to hear about your journey. How did you get into this work? Obviously, you have a PhD. Can you tell us a little bit more about, where you learned your philosophy from and how you decided to pursue and dedicate your life's work to family constellations?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, I'm in my 60s, so it's like it's a pretty long story, but I know you have audience in the Middle East, so if I may, can I share some of that story, because it's an important component.
Yes, please.
And it might be of interest to your audience. So try to make this brief. When I was starting my career, I got an MBA, and I got a job at the Los Alamos Laboratory, which is where the atom bomb had originally been invented and built. After that job was over, I became a peace activist in the city of Cambridge. And I was a founding member of a peace commission that was created to help stop nuclear weapons, stop the creation and the building of nuclear weapons. And I was involved in that. And that led me through a long series of events, which I won't go into. But I ended up in Haifa and connecting with a group of peace pilgrims that had come from Seattle, Washington. Actually, the Jesuit priest who was the chaplain for the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima decided when he was in his 60s, around my age, decided he was going to walk from Seattle to Bethlehem on a pilgrimage for peace, to be able to stop nuclear war. And I caught up with him at the end and with a group of friends, and we were going to walk from Haifa to Bethlehem, and we just chose that we were going to go right into the West Bank as soon as we could. So we walked inland from Haifa up and down Mount Carmel, and we ended up in the West Bank at Jenin. And then I lived in the West Bank for the next 4 months as a Jewish peace activist. Walked the length of the West Bank to Bethlehem, and arrived there on Christmas Eve with this group that we had caught up with finally in Jerusalem. We actually walked as a small group most of the way. And then I took a room with a couple of friends of mine in Bethlehem and lived in that community. And what I learned from living in Bethlehem at that time, this is in the 80s, was that the way that the Palestinian people were portrayed in the American media was so contrary to my experience of living in Bethlehem in that community. It was unrecognizable that within the United States and the media, the Palestinian people were, presented as violent terrorists. Really, that's the only way that they ever are presented, as violent terrorists. And living in Bethlehem, I found the most hospitable, friendly, wise, well-educated, culturally sophisticated, friendly people. And they just really wanted their story told. They wanted the world to see a different picture of them, and to also be able to see what life was like for them under the occupation. And it had a huge impact on me. And so I came home after those months and returned back to my work. But I remained active in peace activity ever since then, which is now almost 40 years. And I recognized that there was a tool missing, that when you try to do peace and bring Israelis or Jews and Palestinians together, and you try to do something for peace, it works for a little bit, but it doesn't work for very long, and it doesn't really stick. And so I was interested in what was the missing tool. And this is what brought me to constellations. And so it's been my life's work since. And it really is the missing tool in the Peacemaker's Toolkit, I believe, as well as being able to help people in their everyday situations. But for looking at the bigger structures of conflict and violence in the world, I think this is part of this work is also the formula.
Wow. I'm sorry, Dan, I got very emotional when you were talking. Sorry, just give me a minute. I have never cried on an interview, and I'm crying now. I think that
it's okay.
Yeah. I think that
yeah, who's crying? That's my question. Who's crying? Just take a moment. Just feel who are you with?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for sure it's a long line of, I think, just grandmother, grandparents, and I think so much of this story also reminds me of the kind of disproportionate amount of maybe not disproportionate, but just the news that portrayed Iraqis in the first Gulf War in a light that was very much about victimization or the antagonist, but never the protagonist. And, and I think that that work is really important to just balance the narrative, instead of it being so polarized. I think that, that's kind of been my long life mission of bringing stories that were not told to kind of the mainstream. And I jokingly say that if you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it for you, and that's what we've seen take place. So yeah, I got emotional, and I think it's so beautiful that you decided to do this kind of peace pilgrimage and this walk, and I think it just touches me because I frankly grew up Iraqi American, not just Arab American, but Iraqi American during a time where the country that I was born to was going to war against the country that my parents were from. And I think that experience is very interesting. It creates a lot of cognitive dissonance between, your identity and how people act and what does it mean to be human. So yeah, just interesting.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
And there's, when you go to the myths, I mean, the founding myths of ours, Western civilization, Middle Eastern and European civilization are from, right around Baghdad. Those, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers that meet there, and so these, gods and goddesses, Inanna and Enki and Gilgamesh, they're still with us, and it's it is the most ancient wisdom tradition of humanity. I mean, the Hindu and the Chinese as well, and then Native American, not the only one, but the wisdom is all there, and it's kind of just painted over with headlines that are aimed to create mistrust and hostility. And there are such deeper truths. I have such appreciation for Arab culture in all of its ways, and also recognize the ways that Arab culture has been misogynist in a lot of ways, and that it certainly is not to paint it all roses, but there's a way that there's great art and wisdom and beauty as well that's really underappreciated in the way that it's portrayed here in the United States.
Yes, thank you, Dan, for sharing your reflections on that. Yeah, it's definitely underrepresented. And Dan, I'd love to also just know, what sort of things have surprised you in this journey? It seems like you've just had such a incredible life, right? And I'm curious, what is the most surprising thing that you've experienced?
Well, I'll tell you, I dare say it, but the most surprising thing is that I can talk to dead people really easily. And I never had any idea that I wouldn't have thought it was possible. And if it was possible, I didn't think that I'd be able to do it. And the only reason I can do it is I started to just look at what it takes to heal people's broken hearts. What is the formula for healing loneliness in individuals? And I just went step by step. And every time I did a process, I tried to do the next process better, try to learn something. And 20 years later, it's like just a cell phone. I can just open up and I can communicate with people's ancestors, and people that I'm with feel like their ancestor is in the room, and without any description. And I'm not doing it as a medium would to just give affirmations. I'm doing deep healing because a lot of these ancestors are not at peace. They are still in turmoil, and the living descendants are in turmoil. So the healing is really between these realms. And if you had asked me, I would have found that really comical to think that I'd be doing that. But here I am, and I have no doubt that that's what I do, and I'm good at it.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm really good at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully on board with the space. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I attended this program called the Academy of Intuition Medicine, and I would say 5 years ago, I didn't believe in anything that was not hard science, and after really like reading hundreds of books and going through experiential experiences, and I think that there's so much that we in mainstream culture have decided to like completely not trust and not be open. We're not open to it. This intuitive side, this connection to the field. I mean, Freud even spoke about this collective, this field. So it's just interesting that I think there's not a lot of space right now in Western culture, to discuss things like intuition and this connection to other realms, right? So I believe it, but I've had to experience many things in order to believe it, and so I think it's fascinating. So what?
And here we are talking, and you have a big audience.
Yeah. 5 years ago, I was reading Christopher Hitchens and would never in a million years thought that I would be, having conversations like this. So it's, you just never know what's going to happen in your life, I guess.
This consciousness is coming to us. It's coming to people like us. It's barging in, and it's telling you to put down those books and open your heart and trust what you feel. And a lot of people are having similar experiences. And people need guides in this, because it's easy to lose one's way. It's easy to be deceived by teachers or business people that exploit people's vulnerability around this. But the people that are doing authentically and are really aligned with helping people heal and helping the world heal are finding each other and coming together, and more people are having the same experience that you're describing. And I believe it's coming from this consciousness. It's coming into us from the larger field of consciousness to wake human beings up to the destruction that they're causing, and to start looking at how to occupy the planet in a different way that's not so destructive.
Beautiful. Yes. Dan, what do you want to tell our listeners about their health and wellness? What's sort of like your main takeaway? Or it could just be on just wellness in general. What do you want to tell our audience as kind of like your final thoughts? And I don't know if you just shared your final thoughts, because it felt very much inspirational and as a takeaway. So that could be it too. But if there's any like last words you want to share.
I think for health and wellness, to the extent that you feel disconnected and alone, that it's not a good terrain for health, and that the body does not respond well to it. That finding connection, human connection, spirit connection, connection to the earth, connection to plants and animals, to ancestors, connection to love, all of those things are the pathways for healing. And there's a remarkable capacity that the body has to heal itself, of course, because we wouldn't be alive for 10 seconds if the body wasn't doing a trillion things without us, without any doctors or any expertise. The body is keeping us standing up and breathing all the time. And that is the greatest healing resource that we have, but it requires connection.
Yeah, I think that we're very much disconnected, especially in Western culture. Thank you, Dan. And are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, your work, maybe, I would say upcoming workshops, but we might not be, making the show live for a little bit. So we can add that later. But if there are any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, I would ask you to share it.
Well, I have, Emily and I have a website. It's seeingwithyourheart.com. It's all of those words put together, seeingwithyourheart.com. And that is the source that where we post the upcoming courses and classes that we're offering. People can inquire for if they want to do individual work, couples constellations that we do, and it has our contact. So that's probably the best way to contact us. And hopefully we'll have more interesting offerings coming down the road. And we're really looking just to be able to touch more people with what we're doing, and we're doing trainings and supporting others, and being able to bring not just constellations, but all types of intuitive medicine, energy medicine out into the world in all its forms.
So it's seeingwithyourheart.com. We'll add it to the show notes. And Dan, are you on social media at all? Any other place? Or is that just the best place to find you?
We have Seeing with Your Heart on Facebook. I get a little bit overwhelmed, and you can find me on Facebook, but it's very personal. If you want to see what a goofball I am, you can friend me. And you'll just hear a lot of, I just use it to make myself laugh.
That's a good reason. Oh, thank you.
Not everybody gets my jokes, but I if I laugh at it, I throw it up on Facebook and take your chances.
I love it. I think we have a similar sense of humor. So I will add you actually right after this.
Okay.
So, Dan, thank you so much for your time. Just felt very touched and moved by the work that you're doing, and the kind of like everything that you're kind of contributing to the collective through the mythology, through your wisdom, through your tools and frameworks, and just philosophy in life. So thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Oh, it's delighted, Yasmin, and I really appreciate what you're doing, bringing this work and the other interviews that you're doing, to new audiences, and it's really beautiful. I love the work that you're doing, and it's been so delightful talking to you. It's been my pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about family constellations and how they can change your life. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness and spirituality. And please drop us a line and tell us what you enjoyed about the show on Gateways to Awakening. Thanks again.